full disclosure, this is Pete's great title for today's Possibility Lab, which I've stolen and whacked on my presentation. So a little bit of stolen glory there. But that idea of using existing ideas is one that's going to come up a lot in the presentation. So it's kind of tracks with how I approach a lot of the work that I do in the disaster space. So what I thought I'd do, as Pete said, I had a bit of a winding path. I wanted to share my before today because I think it gives a bit of context to everything. So starting about 15, 17 years ago, did a lot of travel. I used to run pubs and nightclubs. I did a business degree, also started a fine arts degree in acting. And after, that kind of period of travel and working in pubs, I finally graduated that degree and went, all right, I actually don't like the business degree and I don't know what I'm going to do next. I kind of bounced around doing some on-the-road sales. I've got Italian heritage, so found myself an Italian food company, and that was a regional job across Victoria, Tasmania, and South Australia. I did a bit of Uber driving just to see what the craze was about. It was pretty funny. A lot of great stories, but also got to meet some really interesting people in their day-to-day. And then I found myself in a placemaking startup kind of by accident after doing a sustainability fellowship in 2016. And that's when I really started on this, I guess I'd call it like a narrowing, a focusing in on the things that I was really passionate about and quite enjoyed, which really, you might have guessed, theatre, running pubs and nightclubs, sales, sustainability. It was just all about people and talking to people and being around people and learning from them, but also looking at ways to help, really. That work then took me into the international development and social enterprise space. So I spent about 4.5 years, nearly 5 years in total across 2 NGOs, Pollinate Group, which worked in India and Nepal, and then Engineers Without Borders. And in both of these roles, I was doing partnership development, program design, facilitation, and a lot of in-country work as well, which was really great, very humbling, but also really started to expose me to disasters. And that was particularly in India and Nepal, where a lot of my work found me in informal settlements or slums, more colloquially known. And working those informal settlements, you become so much more, aware of the risks that those communities face to natural hazard. And I was really lucky enough to see the before and after of a cyclone in Kolkata on one of the trips. And it wasn't a massive one, but it was a really significant storm. The informal settlements, a lot of the residents had this really kind of sophisticated but unspoken understanding of what they need to do to prepare their dwellings, which are held by tarp and tin and rope and other kind of improvised materials. And they kind of disassembled parts, secured parts of their homes, and then storm would come and they would be kind of back up and running within a day or so. And it got me really interested in, well, hey, what's this thing? Disaster resilience. So at the time, I was about to enroll in some further international development studies and took 6 months to slow down, do a bit more thinking about disaster work, and decided to start the Master of Disaster Design and Development at RMIT. I also, at that time, was like, well, let's do full-time work, which has me traveling internationally. Let's do full-time study and let's have a kid, which was best decision of my life, but it was also quite a busy time. After about the same time as I graduated the Master of Disaster Design Development, I also joined Fire and Rescue New South Wales. So we'd moved to the Mid-North Coast to be close to the family. I wanted to kind of pitch in my local community, and Fire and Rescue was a great opportunity to do that. And shortly after that, I started with Bellingen Shire Council. Now, at that period, Bellingen Shire had a couple of natural disaster declarations in 21, some big floods and big landslip, and was also still in some of its bushfire recovery operations. I started at Shire in January of 2022, and we had about 6 or 7 minor floods before our major flood in February, and then we had a second higher impact major flood in March of that year. My kid was born a few months later, and then later that, second kid, and then later that year I moved to Coffs. So the period working with Bellingen and with Coffs Harbour was actually an opportunity to apply so many of the lessons and experiences that I kind of picked up along the way into just less than 2 years worth of work time. And so my former colleague is on the call today, Callan. He can probably attest to how fast we moved, but also how that was, there was a bit of strategy to what we were trying to do in that time. And that was the before today. Things that I've learned: I'm competitive. In a professional setting, when I hear the word no, I hear an invitation to try again. So I'm constantly competing against my own expectations of what is possible and what is best practice. I rarely have a new idea. And so I've been really lucky to be around a lot of people who are smarter and braver and more focused and better trained. And, I love learning from others and looking at how I can apply their lessons to, I guess, the problems that communities I'm working with are facing, and looking at how I can adapt their ideas to address those problems. I have an uneasy feeling about that term systems thinker, but I would say that I am a systems thinker, but I'm not really structured. Each change in my career path, education, it's all been driven by an interest into how systems work, and really understanding the social and political relations within those systems, and how they either aid or stop good things happening. And that's kind of led to this big realization that you can't understand complexity without first trying to understand people. And that's why I wanted to share a little bit about myself. It's because everyone has these really rich and diverse and complex stories that contribute to how and when and who they are when they show up. And I found that getting to know the whole person really aids work within communities, whether that's in those international development settings or with disaster impacted people closer to home. And because I rarely have a new idea, I'm constantly asking myself the question, that project or that program, that event, that initiative, that got some really great outcomes. I wonder if we could adapt that and get similar outcomes here in the context that I'm working in. And when I hear no, I hear an invitation to try again. And I ask myself, what kind of no is this? Why did I get a no? What tools do I have at hand to support a shift from no to yes? And I think, this has really been formed by the fact that, the last couple of years working in local government, we're often really restricted by funding, scope, perceived roles under legislation, and these resilience and recovery roles and short-term temporary resilience and recovery roles, the functions can be a bit ambiguous as to where we fit, how we fit. And I've often kind of seen myself or heard from others about this idea of falling into this purgatory of, well, that's not been done before, so we're not sure it can be done, so it's a no, or we can't proceed. But I think a lot of those no's, while no's are really important, you've got to be respectful and cautious and treat no with respect. A lot of no's that you receive in local government, I found, were reflexive responses to anything that looked like change or anything that was a new idea or that challenged existing ways of working. And, any ideas which, were introduced, that introduced novel solutions to persistent problems or systems gaps, often that reflexive no is because, a person or a structure or hierarchy had decided that is a problem, but there isn't a way to fix it, therefore we're not going to try to fix it. So I started to really kind of dwell on that idea when I was still at Shire Council around that question of like, well, what kind of no is this? Is it non-negotiable? Is it flexible? Is it soft? Is it hard? Is it role-based? Is it informed by scope or legislation? Why did I get a no? Like, is it me? Is it the project? Is it them? Is it other projects? And I started to to look for tools that were at hand. So not bringing anything new to the argument or the discussion, just using things that were already existed or already kind of kosher within whatever organization I was in. And so when I started to look at that idea of no as an invitation to, try a new approach, reframe the problem, show why the idea was best practice, as opposed to being a might be nice to do thing, and really starting to narrow in on this idea of selling the future, not just the present. So, if we, accept the no now, what is that? What are the potential future outcomes of that? What does that look like for us? Versus, what if we just said yes, took a chance, tried something new? What would be the potential benefits in the community? So to kind of, I guess, describe what that looks like in practice, I've started to kind of pinch this concept and put a new name on it. So some of you might have heard of this idea of a social license. I've started using a term called bureaucratic license. So social license has been defined as existing when a project has the ongoing approval within the local community and other stakeholders, and ongoing approval of broad social acceptance, and most frequently has ongoing acceptance. That's one of the kind of official definitions. But the social license idea is built on three pillars: legitimacy, credibility, and trust. To build a bureaucratic license, it's a very similar process. You play by the rules, so you've got to know the policies, the legislation, the ways of working in the organization, finding the precedents, and really kind of pushing a positive interpretation of any existing policy or legislation that might be ambiguous. The other, the next thing is that idea of credibility. So always following through on what you say you're going to do. And no one's perfect at that. I think of all the times where I've not followed through well enough or inconsistently, and I cringe a little bit, but it's a really important thing to strive for. And you've got to display that your opinion on why a no should be a yes is informed by pragmatism and evidence, and anticipate the information that decision makers may need before they ask for it. So they're building that kind of credibility, which obviously leads into the trust factor. Any new idea or anything that kind of pushes an existing boundary within an LGA, I found was perceived as a risk. It was perceived as potentially a reputational risk, or a personal risk to the line manager, or a financial risk. So it really meant that I had to build a lot of trust in short timeframes, and I found that the best way to build that trust was to identify and communicate the risk, and really start to show that mitigations had already been thought about and put in place. The less time you have to build that trust, I think the more effort that needs to go into it. And so simply put, building that bureaucratic license, as I kind of term it, is like finding ways to navigate all of that ambiguity that comes with our roles. You're creating inroads for current and future yeses. So you may be doing all of that credibility and trust work to get a yes for a project that still may fall over, but you've created a bit of a channel to get other ideas up in the future. And something that I've always done is I always take to any ask something that I'm happy for it to be said no to. I'm sorry, that sounds really jarbled, but if I've got one thing that I want to do, I'll always take something else along that I present as the thing that's probably going to get shot down. So if we're starting off with a bit of compromise, well, you've lost that, why don't you think about this? And using what's already written down. A lot of the projects that we were able to do over the couple of years within Coffs Harbour were so reliant on stuff that the council had already committed to, or was already in legislation or a policy document somewhere. And once I found one of those written things that could support the project work that I wanted to start, I was like a dog with a bone. I was like, look, you've already committed to this, therefore let's just let me do it, please. And that comes down to that that positive interpretation of anything that's ambiguous, daring to do things a little bit differently, but also trying to bring people along and show them, that they're part of that process. So as part of presenting today, I was asked to bring along 2 projects. The 2 projects that I've chosen, one of them kind of started while I was at Bellingen and followed me into Coffs Harbour. So kind of at the start of that local government journey. The second one was a project that was at the tail end of my tenure with Coffs Harbour. And I think they offer a really nice comparison of lessons learned as well. And so, the second project was really informed by a lot of the things that I picked up from, going through the first journey. So the first project that I was going to share, and I'm going to assume, I shouldn't assume, but I'm going to use a bunch of acronyms and things like that. But if there's anything that's unclear, if you put it in the chat, I'll try to answer it later on in the session. But the Disability Inclusive Emergency Planning Forums were initiatives that were run by Michelle Villeneuve at the Centre for Disability Research at the University of Sydney as part of the Leave Nobody Behind research project. So I learned about the forums while doing the PSEP Facilitator Certificate training in probably September 2022. And I immediately was like, well, how do we start doing this in Bellingen? Learned about the DIEP forums and started to advocate within our council for us to host one of these. Ultimately, I was unsuccessful at that time to deliver the forum within Bellingen. A couple of things came up. One of them was that within our team and with our LEMO, there was a feeling that the LEMC may, they're a bit more response focused, even though they should be everything focused. But they probably won't want to be involved in this. And the Bellingen Disability Inclusion Action Plan was really not strong enough as an advocacy tool to overcome that barrier. The only reference to disaster in that DIEP was investigate challenges for people with disability during disaster events, with no actual actions or deliverables marked against it. So it was just kind of like we thought about it type line in the DIEP. And so why the DIEP forum is important is because it brings together people with disability, their carers, service providers, emergency services, and local and state government partners with the goal of identifying gaps and strengths in an LGA, and then generating some key learnings, which obviously then inform ongoing disability inclusive disaster risk reduction work. So it was unsuccessful, but there was a circuit breaker. Later that year, or November or so, I started a role with the City of Coffs Harbour, and the Coffs Harbour DIEP was much stronger. So what remained the same was that Bellingen and Coffs LEMC still a bit response focused, and Bellingen Council was still a no to hosting one. It's really fortunate that when I shifted jobs to another council that was in the same emergency management structure as the council I'd just been working in. So it meant I took a lot of understanding and knowledge of how the two organizations operated. But other things that changed in the new role was that it was funded slightly differently, different grant, different guidelines, a little bit more flexibility to advocate for this work, different resource levels within the new council. And I was tasked with starting a new council service, which built on the work of previous recovery officers. And so I was able to position DIDRR as one of the kind of focus and pillar areas. And lastly, I mentioned the DIEP earlier. So the COST DIEP was a really valuable tool in advocating for the DIEP forums. It had a strategy which was I think it was like targeted response to emergency management for people with disability. And the action was develop and implement guidelines to ensure that the needs of people with disability are prioritized during times of emergency. So that DIEP and its strength really laid the groundwork for a more favorable interpretation of things like the State Emergency and Rescue Management Act and the roles of the LEMC under that. But probably the biggest thing that helped that situation was that I had the benefit of having already been told no. And then I asked myself those questions. Why did I get a no? Well, for Bello, it was resources. It was where do we get the funding from this grant? It was an extra because it was, such a low and undefined priority in the DIEP. What kind of no was it? Well, I felt it was pretty soft. I was like, well, if I reckon I can, answer some of those issues, we can get a yes. And what tools can help get a yes? Well, when I was at COFS, I noticed that they had some slightly better DIEP. Well, hey, I can probably use that. So the convincing ground for that project, we convened the Disability Inclusion and Access Advisory Committee, and I made the decision up to them. I said, would you like me to pursue this and try to put this on or not? After that kind of briefing, that session, that committee said, yes, we think that would be great for you to do. So that gave me a little bit of a toehold within COFS Council alongside the DIEP, going through kind of 3 briefing layers. And then I had to brief the LEMO and say, can we please do this? These are the reasons why. And I used rival councils. Now, I don't say that as in like, we were fighting other councils. It was more that our council's outlook at the time was, well, we are a city, we're growing, we're a regional centre. How do we want to be viewed? And there was a lot of benchmarking against places like the city of the Gold Coast, the city of Newcastle. So I started to show what similar councils were doing in the disability space as a way to say, our committee wants it, our DIEP says we're going to do it. This is a best practice approach informed by research, and other councils are doing this or similar work. So we can be a leader or we can be a laggard. While that was going on, we obviously spoke to Bellingen again, and I said, hey, look, this actually looks like it's going to happen. Want to rethink that that no? Can we maybe make that a yes? And it then became conditional on the LEMC endorsement for Bellingen to host one. We did a briefing with all the EM stakeholders separately, and then got the LEMC support, and quickly followed by Bellingen Shire. So that process from starting in Bellingen to when we actually delivered the forum was about 7 or 8 months, with about 5 months of advocating to get the yes. So it was a pretty drawn out process, but it was also like a really rewarding one, because it had a lot of really nuanced steps, and there were quite a few soft no's, which was lucky, and not too many big hard no's, but there were it was pretty much stacked against us being able to do it. So it was really great to deliver them in the end. And so the outcome, we had... Oh,
Luke, sort of 2 or 3 more minutes.
Yeah, sweet. Had good attendance across both forums, and we then saw our EM agencies start to regularly attend and engage with DIDRR events that we hosted. And we also established the PCEP Connect community of practice, which is a learning community for person-centered emergency preparedness, as one of the responses to the learnings we had from the forum. I'm going to speed mode this next one. 2 minutes or less. All right, let's go. The other project I wanted to share was the Multi-Lingual Emergency Warnings Network. So we're COFS is a refugee welcome zone, very low English skills, spoken and written. Emergency warnings don't reach these residents. And so with a couple of partners in workers from the Red Cross and the St. Vincent de Paul Humanitarian Resettlement Service, we went about figuring out a way to get emergency warnings to those emergent language communities in a timely and accurate way. The big challenge was that the Australian warning systems and EM agencies are incredibly rigid, and rightly so. Like the messaging needs to be consistent and understandable and accurate, but those things don't necessarily reach emergent language communities, and official warnings have to be interpreted by official interpreters, so NADI certified interpreters. And most of our language communities in Coffs Harbour, there just isn't a NADI qualified person available to do that. So what we did, I'll skip that slide. What we did is went about getting permission, well, not so much permission, we created a WhatsApp community that took the official warnings as they came out and amplified them. And so we used that word very intentionally. We spent a lot of time engaging with emergency partners at the SES and other agencies about that idea of sharing emergency warnings versus amplifying them. And it was in that kind of little, rather benign change of language that we got the bureaucratic floodgates kind of opened, and suddenly it went from a lot of fear and risk of us sharing warnings incorrectly or getting the incorrect information out. But once we started to pivot to that idea of, well, we're actually just taking your message and getting it to more people, that amplification process looks like, A, B, C, D. We had a lot more support and a lot more understanding and a lot more collaboration from the emergency partners, which is great. And that here, translate, amplify, that little switch was probably the big, bureaucratic wrangle, which was really exciting to get past that hurdle. And, we've since been able to activate the network a number of times to get warnings out there.